All right, we got skookum suspension in the back, skookum suspension in the front. Unfortunately, right now it's connected by a loose conglomerate of al dente spaghetti noodles that is the original unibody of the car. So, what we're going to do is we're going to use some Detroit Speed subframe connectors, this nice little kit right here, to remedy that situation. What it's going to do is it's going to tie the front of this unibody frame rail. See, there you go right there, that comes in. There's the rear suspension spring pocket. It's going to come up here and tie it into the rear of the front subframe. There's a lot of subframe connectors out there. This car came with some really terrible ones that were half welded, half bolted in. And there's a lot of really nice bolt-in units. In fact, SpeedTech makes one. But I decided to go with the Detroit Speed pieces because they are integrated into the floor pan. It really kind of ties everything together. It's a pretty sleek install, and I'm obviously going to have to do some modification to make it work out, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the other consideration is that because the Detroit Speed pieces are just kind of some fabricated pieces of steel, they're a lot cheaper than a lot of the other options. So let's get on with it. Nothing to see here but cutting some big old slices out of perfectly good body panels on what used to be a perfectly roadworthy Camaro. Obviously, a lot of the work is being done with my trusty Insta-death 4000. Basically, you just got to cut into the floor pan here so you can put those subframe connectors and they'll be seam welded all around. The instructions on Detroit Speed were pretty good. They have you measure over from the pinch weld. I had to adjust it a little bit, probably because the SpeedTech frame is just slightly different than what the stock frame is, but that's not their fault, nor is it DSE's. Here's the subframe passenger side sitting in the floor pan there. Apologies for the cricket, haven't been able to find them. So you can see how it kind of slots in here and nuzzles up around the front edge of the rear subframe. There's some gaps, it's not too bad, nothing the MIG can't solve. So it'll be welded back here and all the way down, welded here, everything like that. So up here, I had to cut them a little short, which is what I was showing you the video of with the chop saw. And that's to be expected. This is where things get a little interesting and I have to deviate, because for the DSE applications, the tail end of the subframe for both the DSE aftermarket and the stock subframe look a little different than the SpeedTech. And so for the DSE subframe, they give you these 1/4 inch thick plates, and they're supposed to flush right up, and then you basically weld the subframe connector with these rosette welds and all the way around the edge to the end of the subframe, so it becomes one solid piece. And obviously that is beneficial for stiffness, but the problem in my case is, well, number one, obviously the profile doesn't match up. That's not a big deal. I can make more plates that do. But the problem is, because I'm running the SpeedTech rear suspension, I have this front suspension cross member here that holds the nose of the torque arm. Well, the issue is, if I ever wanted to drop this transmission, I need to get this out. Either that or I have to take the whole engine and transmission out. So if I wanted to change the clutch or something, everything's got to come out because this is in the way. So this is sandwiched between the floor pan and the top of these frame rails on the subframe. So if you leave them bolt-in, you can drop this a little bit. You can just pry them down and you can slip this out, I believe. And then I can drop the transmission and drop the transmission cross member and drop the transmission and get to the clutch. It's still a little bit of a hassle, but it's better than taking everything out. So I want to preserve that, which means I can't just go welding these guys, which will be welded into the car, to this. But I still want to preserve the stiffness. So what I'm going to do instead is I got some 2-inch by 1/4 plate, and what I'm gonna do is come right up here, and these are gonna get welded to the subframe there. And then what's gonna happen back here is I'm gonna drill 3 or 4 holes through here, and I'm gonna go through here with maybe like 1/2-inch grade 8 bolts through this side and through this side back here, and they're gonna get bolted together and sandwiched along here. Quite a lot of crush, because this plate will keep me from pinching the this metal, which is actually quite thick. So while it won't be quite as stiff as if I had welded it together, because I'm really beefing up this section, then if I ever need to drop the subframe out for whatever reason, I can unbolt these, and when the subframe comes out, the whole thing will slide down and out of the way and leave those in the car. So I'll show you what that looks like all fabbed up and kind of just loosely bolted into position on the DSE subframe connector. You can see they're much more beefy than the originals, simply because I'm trying to use these bolts instead. And then on this side you see a bunch of holes, and I'll show you why those are there. We come on over to the car. So I got the passenger side one in the car, just kind of sitting up in there, clamped in position. The original, or the DSE piece is right here. Here's the plate that I made. Like I said, 3 grade 8 1/2-inch bolts. It's gonna provide a lot of squeeze. There's another plate on the other side. This is not a dynamic joint. This is a crush joint. So these pins aren't here for their shear value. They're here so that I can really torque these down. And all of the rigidity of this system right here will be because these 1/4-inch plates are sandwiched really tightly against this tube. And on this side, I'm gonna weld, but because it's this seam up here is so close to the floor pan, I wouldn't really be able to get a good weld on it. So what I did instead was I put these holes all along here so I could rosette weld. So it'll be a seam on the bottom, seam there, and you can kind of see inside I can weld right there as well, and then across the top I can do these rosettes. And if we come along around to the other side, you can see similar story over here. Yoke plate. This one I can run a little bit longer because the transmission crossmember abutment isn't in the way, and I get a lot more rosette welds there. So what I'm going to do now to make sure this thing stays aligned is I'm going to bolt these things down tight, and then I'm going to weld it to the subframe, and then I'm going to weld the subframe connector in last. You would think that I would weld this, then weld this, and then drill the holes, and ideally that would be what you would do. But the problem is you're gonna have a hard time getting a drill with a big 1/2-inch drill bit up in here at the right angle to drill these holes, number one. And number two, you're gonna have a real hard time getting the alignment right when you do the hole through here, all the way through the tube and out the other side to keep it aligned. Certainly doing it by hand with a hand drill. So what I did was took these over to the drill press, aligned everything, punched the hole all the way through, so I know that these holes on this side and these holes on this side are really, really aligned. Then again, tighten this down, weld this. The fat last thing I'll do will be to weld this into the car. I heard one of my viewers liked welding action shots, so there are a couple time lapses for you. Basically all I've done is weld the end caps onto the tubes before I start assembling it into the car. Hadn't TIG welded in about 3 months and it shows. This was the first one. Really didn't have my arm position right. You can tell it's kind of inconsistent. You can see by the little rust color here that I actually dipped the tungsten right down here. And this was the second one, much more consistent. So it's coming along. I don't know if I'd pay me to do this, but somebody might. I'm getting ready to weld the passenger side subframe connector in, just like I was mentioning before, but I wanted to make one point before I did it. You'll notice the car is now no longer on the lift. It's down on jack stands, and I've got the rear jack stands on the rear axle and the front jack stands kind of supported on the lower A-arms, but in line with where the front axle is. And the reason I did that, for you longtime viewers, you might remember when I first picked the car up on the lift with this new subframe on it, you could see when you picked it up with the lift pad right there, even though it was as far forward as you could really get, the whole car bowed because this engine hanging off the front, when you lifted it up, it flexed the unibody. This is, number one, exactly why you need to put subframe connectors if you're going to do any serious racing or anything, because of that bow. You want to take it out. But number two, you need to be careful, because if I were to leave this thing up on the lift and then weld in the subframe connectors, I would have basically permanently set that bow shape in the car. Now, it wasn't that much, but it would be enough to potentially throw off some alignment on things. So keep in mind, when you go to weld in something like the subframe connectors, make sure it's supported about where the wheels will be. Otherwise, you're going to be welding misalignment into the body. Well, you spend enough time welding overhead, you're bound to get some slag on your soft fleshy bits. So they're all in though. Here's a shot of them both in the car. Here's the driver's side. Here's the passenger side over there. I haven't dressed these welds at all. This is just the raw stuff. So you're kind of welding thin 20 gauge over to 1/8 inch tubes. So it's a little bit of a challenge not to blow through and get good penetration. But honestly, I put enough metal glue on these things to stick together half a battleship, so I don't think it's going anywhere. They're pretty solidly in the car. Sorry about the garage cricket over there. He seems to have set up choir practice on the other side of the lift. We'll get a shot from underneath. All right, here's the back of one of the subframe connectors. I got the weld that connects the subframe connector to the original uniframe or unibody frame rail of the car right here. I got some weld splatter in here, so I'll clean that up a little bit. I'm not going to mess with trying to clean these welds up. They're tucked up in there and they're nice enough. I don't really care. One thing I will point out is over here on welds like this, where I've got a really thick 1/4 inch going to 1/8 inch, I really wanted to make sure this had good penetration, because this is the side that had less weld than back here. So so I turned the heat up to make sure I got penetration, but because I was welding overhead, it kind of sagged. This weld kind of sagged down a little bit. So because I'm vain, I'm going to come back with a flapper wheel and just flatten this off, and probably flatten off some of these rosette welds as well. But for now, the next step is to strip and paint, and I will spare you the monotony.